"You must suffer to become a man," he would scream. At 20, I won the Nobel Prize, and he cried for the first time. Yesterday, I found his letter to my mother. If he becomes successful, they will take him away. Growing up, I thought every kid got beaten for getting perfect grades. When I brought home my first A+ in second grade, I was so proud I ran all the way home from the bus stop. I burst through the front door with the biggest smile, waving that paper like it was a trophy. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about success and love. He grabbed the paper from my hands, looked at it for what felt like forever, then his face twisted into something I can only describe as pure rage mixed with terror. The belt came off faster than I could blink. 20 lashes across my back while he screamed about how I was getting too smart for my own good, how pride would be my downfall, how suffering builds character. I was 7 years old, and I genuinely believed this was normal parenting. Every perfect score, every achievement, every moment of academic success brought the same result. Math competition winner? Belt. Science fair first place? Belt. Honor society invitation? You get the picture. By the time I was in middle school, I started deliberately getting B's just to avoid the beatings. But somehow, even when I tried to dumb myself down, I still stood out. Teachers would pull me aside asking why such a bright kid was suddenly slipping. I'd just shrug and say I was tired. The weird thing was, he never hit me for anything else. Failed a test? He'd help me study. Got in trouble at school? He'd take my side. Broke something around the house? No big deal. It was only excellence that triggered his violence, and that messed with my head in ways I'm still trying to understand. I started associating success with pain, achievement with punishment. Part of me wondered if he was trying to protect me from something, but from what? High school was when things got really strange. Despite my efforts to stay average, I kept excelling without even trying. Complex equations would just make sense to me instantly. I'd read a history book once and remember every detail. Languages came to me like I was remembering them rather than learning them. My guidance counselor kept pushing me toward advanced programs, but I'd always find excuses to decline. The fear of going home with another achievement award was stronger than my curiosity about my own potential. My mom never intervened during the beatings. She'd just disappear into the kitchen or bedroom, turning up the TV volume. Sometimes I'd catch her watching from the hallway with this look I couldn't understand, not quite sadness, not quite fear, but something deeper, like she was carrying a secret that was eating her alive. She tried to patch me up afterward, applying ice to the welts, but she never spoke about what had happened. The silence in our house was suffocating. The breaking point came during my senior year. I'd been accepted to several prestigious universities with full scholarships, but I was terrified to tell him. For weeks, I hid the acceptance letters under my mattress, trying to figure out how to turn them down without raising suspicion. But my school counselor called home to congratulate my parents, and the secret was out. That night was the worst beating of my life. He didn't just use the belt. He used his fists, a wooden spoon, anything he could grab. I remember thinking I might actually die right there on the kitchen floor. But what haunts me most wasn't the physical pain. It was what he kept repeating while he hit me. He wasn't angry this time. He was crying, begging me to understand that he was doing this because he loved me, because he had to keep me safe. From what? I had no idea. Update 1. College was my escape, or so I thought. 3,000 miles away from home, I finally let myself excel without fear. It was like taking off weights I'd been carrying my whole life. My professors were amazed at how quickly I absorbed complex concepts, how I could make connections others missed. I started to understand that what I'd experienced at home wasn't normal, that most parents celebrated their children's achievements instead of punishing them. But the damage was done. Every success felt hollow. Every accomplishment triggered anxiety attacks. I'd win academic competitions and immediately feel sick to my stomach, waiting for punishment that never came. My roommates thought I was crazy when I'd flinch every time good news arrived. I couldn't form normal relationships because I was constantly waiting for people to hurt me the moment I showed any competence or confidence. The research opportunities came naturally. Professors would recommend me for programs I'd never even heard of, and somehow I'd always exceed their expectations. By my junior year, I was working on projects that graduate students struggled with. My advisor kept saying I had a gift, that I was destined for great things, but those words made my skin crawl. Every compliment felt like a threat. I called home less and less, but when I did, the conversations were strange. My mom would ask detailed questions about my studies, my research, my professors. At the time, I thought she was just being supportive, trying to make up for my dad's weird behavior. but there was an urgency to her questions that I couldn't place. Sometimes I'd catch her whispering to someone in the background, though she claimed no one else was there. My dad never asked about school directly, but I could hear him listening on the extension. Occasionally he'd make comments about how I shouldn't trust everyone, how some opportunities were too good to be true, how I needed to be careful about who I shared my work with. I thought he was just being paranoid, maybe feeling guilty about how he'd treated me growing up. The breakthrough came during my senior year. I was working on what I thought was a theoretical physics problem, but the solution I found had implications I didn't fully understand at the time. My professor's reaction was intense. He immediately called colleagues, held hushed meetings, made phone calls behind closed doors. Within weeks, I was being invited to present at conferences, interviewed by people from organizations I'd never heard of. That's when I started noticing them. The same faces showing up at different events. People who claimed to be from various universities or research institutions, but something about them felt off. They'd ask questions that seemed innocent enough, but there was a pattern I couldn't quite identify. They wanted to know about my background, my family, my childhood development. Why would theoretical physicists care about my personal history? The Nobel Prize nomination came out of nowhere. I was 20 years old, still an undergraduate student, being considered for the highest honor in science. The media attention was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside my dorm. Professors I'd never met were suddenly my best friends, and those mysterious faces from the conferences became more frequent and obvious in their surveillance. But the strangest part was my parents' reaction when I called to tell them. My mom started crying immediately, not happy tears, but desperate, terrified sobs. My dad got on the phone, and for the first time in my life, he sounded proud. But underneath the pride was something else. Relief? Resignation? He kept saying he was sorry, that he'd tried his best, that he hoped I'd understand someday. When I actually won the prize, my parents flew out for the ceremony. Seeing my dad in that audience, watching me accept the medal, was surreal. He was crying openly. This man who'd beaten me for every achievement was now sobbing with what looked like joy. But when our eyes met across the auditorium, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. He wasn't looking at me like a proud father. He was looking at me like he was saying goodbye. Update 2. After the Nobel Prize, everything changed, but not in the way I expected. The opportunities that flooded in weren't just academic. They were from organizations with letters for names, government contractors, private research facilities with security clearances I'd never heard of. Everyone wanted to know how a 20-year-old had solved problems that had stumped entire teams of seasoned researchers. I chose to continue my education, turning down most of the offers, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched constantly. My phone would have strange clicks, my mail would arrive opened and resealed, my computer would act weird sometimes. When I mentioned this to friends, they thought I was paranoid from all the sudden fame. Maybe they were right, but the feeling never went away. My relationship with my parents became even stranger after the ceremony. My mom would call at odd hours, asking coded questions about my research, my living situation, whether I felt safe. My dad, on the other hand, seemed to age 10 years overnight. The few times I saw him, he looked haunted, constantly checking over his shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds. I started digging into my own past, trying to understand why my childhood had been so bizarre. Why had my parents moved so many times when I was young? Why were there no baby pictures of me? Why did I have no extended family, no grandparents, no cousins? Every question led to more questions, and my parents' answers became increasingly evasive. The first real clue came when I was going through old documents for a security clearance application. My birth certificate looked wrong somehow. The paper was too new. The seal was slightly off. When I compared it to friends' birth certificates, the differences were obvious. Mine was a fake, but a very sophisticated one. That's when I hired a private investigator. What he found should have been impossible. According to official records, I didn't exist until I was 3 years old. Before that, there was no trace of me anywhere. No hospital records, no early medical visits, nothing. It was like I'd been dropped into existence as a toddler with a full set of fake documents. When I confronted my parents with this information, my mom had a complete breakdown. She kept saying she was sorry, that they'd tried to give me a normal life, that they'd never meant for it to go this far. My dad just sat there, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. Finally, he spoke, and what he said changed everything. He wasn't my father. My mom wasn't my mother. They were, in his words, my guardians. He'd been working security at some kind of research facility when I was a child, and something had happened. He wouldn't tell me exactly what, but he'd taken me and run. They've been hiding me ever since, trying to give me as normal a life as possible while suppressing the abilities that made me dangerous to have around. The beatings, he explained, weren't about hatred or cruelty. They were about fear. Every time I excelled, every time I showed the full extent of my capabilities, he was terrified that whoever had created me would find us. He thought if he could make me afraid of success, if he could teach me to hide my abilities, we could stay safe forever. But winning the Nobel Prize had made hiding impossible. The whole world knew about me now, and according to him, it was only a matter of time before they came to collect what was theirs. I didn't believe him at first. It sounded like the ravings of a paranoid man trying to justify decades of abuse. But then he showed me the documents he'd kept hidden all these years, medical files, research notes, photographs that made my blood run cold. I wasn't just some gifted kid who'd been adopted. I was a project, an experiment. And according to these files, I wasn't the only one. Final update. Yesterday, 23 years after my fake father first brought me home, they finally found me. I was grading papers in my office when two people in black suits walked in without knocking. They looked exactly like you'd imagine government agents would look, perfectly groomed, emotionless, speaking in flat monotones. But there was something else about them that I couldn't place at first. They moved too smoothly, their eyes tracked movement in a way that seemed almost mechanical, and when they spoke, it was like they were accessing information rather than remembering it. They knew everything about me. Not just the public stuff from the Nobel Prize, but private details that only I should have known. They mentioned conversations I'd had in supposedly secure locations, thoughts I'd written in journals I'd kept hidden, even dreams I'd had that I'd never told anyone about. One of them referred to me as Subject 42, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The files my fake father had shown me weren't complete. What he'd stolen from that facility 23 years ago wasn't just documents about a genetic experiment. I was the experiment. Created, not born. Designed, not developed naturally. Every ability I had, every instinct that had made me different, every moment of inexplicable knowledge or intuition, it was all programmed into me before I was even conscious enough to understand what was happening. They explained it calmly, like they were discussing the weather. I was part of a program designed to create enhanced human beings for purposes they wouldn't specify. Multiple subjects had been created, but most hadn't survived the early development phases. I was one of only 3 successful subjects from my generation, and the only one who'd been missing for over 2 decades. My fake father hadn't been a security guard who'd grown attached to a child and decided to rescue me from an unethical experiment. He'd been one of their agents, assigned to monitor me and report back on my development. But somewhere along the way, he developed genuine feelings for me and my fake mother. When the program had decided to move to the next phase of my development, something that would have required separating me from everything I'd known, he'd made a choice that had surprised everyone, including himself. He'd taken me and run, but he'd known they would eventually find us. Every beating, every moment of cruelty, every attempt to make me hide my abilities, it had all been his desperate attempt to keep me under the radar long enough for me to grow up and maybe have some semblance of a normal life. He'd been trying to save me the only way he knew how, even though it meant becoming the monster in my childhood memories. The agents told me I had a choice, but the way they said it made it clear it wasn't really a choice at all. I could come with them voluntarily and be reunited with my real family, the other subjects who'd been successfully recovered, or they could make the decision for me. Either way, I was going home to complete the development process I'd started over 2 decades ago. I asked what would happen to my fake parents, the people who'd raised me and loved me in their broken way. The agents exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know. There wouldn't be any loose ends left behind. Everyone who'd known about my existence in this life would need to be dealt with appropriately. That's when something inside me snapped. All those years of suppressed abilities, all that potential my fake father had tried so hard to contain, came flooding back at once. I don't know how to describe what happened next, except that suddenly I understood exactly what I was capable of and why these people had created me in the first place. The agents weren't expecting resistance from someone they considered their property. They definitely weren't expecting the level of resistance I was capable of providing. Within minutes, their perfect composure was gone, their mechanical movements became erratic, and for the first time, they looked genuinely surprised. I won't go into details about what I did to them, but let's just say they won't be reporting back to their superiors about successfully recovering Subject 42. Now I'm sitting in my car, driving toward my fake parents' house, trying to figure out what comes next. I know they'll send more agents, and I know those agents will be better prepared for what I'm capable of. But I also know something they probably don't expect. I'm not just their creation anymore. 23 years of human experiences, of love and pain and growth and choice, have made me something more than what they designed. My fake father tried to protect me by making me weak, by teaching me to hide. But what he actually did was give me something more valuable than any enhancement they could have programmed into me. He gave me the ability to choose who I want to be, regardless of how I was created or what I was designed for. I'm going to warn them, help them disappear if possible, and then I'm going to make a choice of my own. I'm going to find the other subjects, the ones who were recovered and completed their development. I'm going to find out exactly what this program is really about and who's running it. And then I'm going to shut it down. The man who beat me for every achievement might not have been my real father, but he taught me the most important lesson of my life without meaning to. Sometimes the greatest act of love is being willing to become the villain in someone else's story if it means keeping them safe. I understand now why he cried when I won the Nobel Prize. It wasn't pride or joy. It was grief. He knew that moment meant his time as my protector was over, and that everything he'd sacrificed to keep me hidden had been for nothing. But maybe it wasn't for nothing after all. Maybe those 23 years of humanity, of choice, of love mixed with pain, gave me exactly what I need to face whatever comes next. They created me to be their perfect weapon, but my fake father made me something they never intended. He made me human. And that might just be enough to beat them at their own game.